My name is Rebecca Boardman. I am a member of the Church of England and I work for USPG, United Society Partners in the Gospel, which is a 300-year-old Anglican mission agency. Our Gospel reading is taken from the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 6 to 8 and 19 to 28. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you a prophet?" He answered, "No." Then they said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as the prophet Isaiah said." Now they had been sent from the Pharisees. They asked him, "Why then are you baptizing if you are neither the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thongs of his sandal." This took place in Bethany, across the Jordan where John was baptizing. This is the word of the Lord. It has only been quite recently that I have come to appreciate the gift of the season of Advent. As a child, Advent was brushed over. December was simply an extended Christmas, a month of activities and parties with those who I wouldn't be spending Christmas Day with. At best, Advent was a countdown until the real fun of the Christmas holidays could begin. It wasn't until I spent a year with the Episcopal Church in the Philippines that I was introduced to the stillness, peace, and hope that came with first observing the season of Advent. In waiting for the 25th of December to celebrate Christmas, Advent became for me what it was intended to be, a time for reflection in a period of darkness, a season of expectation, of hope, and of promise. This is a lesson and a practice that I've carried with me since then. And so as I sit here in London in autumn 2020, in the midst of a global climate and ecological crisis, embedded in systems of oppression and racial injustice, and as I watch the UK's national cases of COVID-19 rise once again, not for the first time this year have I felt that possibly the darkness is too much, and that maybe we need the solace, comfort, and hope of the season of Advent now more than ever. And so it is in that spirit that we approach this week's reading, a very familiar passage that speaks to being a witness to light in the darkness and to being a voice in the wilderness crying, "Make straight the ways of the Lord." And so in my reflection today, I ask, what does this mean for us in our own contexts of darkness and wilderness? And what can we learn from John as we, like him, follow God's sending to be witnesses to Christ in our own communities? John is a remarkable individual, representing both the last of the prophets, but also the first of the evangelists. In our passage, we hear that John was sent by God. John was indeed a missionary, sent by God to point others to Jesus, to prepare the way for others to encounter Jesus. It is from John's example that we are also able to model our responses to the mission that God has for our lives, one that is done in a spirit of humility, faithfulness, and self-sacrifice. It was never about John, it was always about Jesus. And in the same way, it is never about us, it is always about Jesus. Even as the crowds grew and John gained notoriety and status, he continues to assert that he is not the Messiah or a prophet, instead subordinating himself to Jesus, the true light of the world. As I've said, it feels to me as though we are in a period of incredible darkness, characterized by uncertainty and fear. This past year has not been what any of us expected. And yet it is within this context that God has sent us, his people, to be witnesses to the light. Over the past 9 months, we have seen this as churches across our Anglican communion have stepped up to provide hope and acts of loving service, in spite of the challenges that COVID-19 has brought on their own communities. To mention but a few, we have seen this in the response of the Diocese of Niassa in Mozambique, who have carried out an awareness-raising campaign in their communities, teaching hygiene and practical ways to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We have seen this in the Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, who have distributed food packages to elderly and homebound people across Jamaica. We have seen this in the members of St Barnabas Church in Walthamstow here in London, who have phoned up individuals in their congregation who do not have access to the internet to ensure that they remain connected to their spiritual community whilst being confined to their homes. We continue to see acts of faithfulness, humility, and self-sacrifice in spite of the many challenges that each of us face. The light shines in the darkness. God's light shines in our darkness. And so this Advent, how do we point people to the hope and light of Christ? How can we be vessels of expectation, of promise, and of hope? Amen.